Hey guys, this is Shady, coming at you with some kind of a little bit of a depressing opener, but I feel like I owe the fans and all of you who are waiting on the next episode an explanation. So we had to delay our episode a week, and obviously I'm still a little late, getting it out late on Tuesday night / early Wednesday morning rather than releasing this morning. And I owe it to you guys, kind of an explanation, but also I'm going to steal a little bit of our guest spotlight to promote somebody very close to me. My youngest brother, Cannon, unfortunately passed 2 weeks ago now, and it's been a real kind of rough 2 weeks, and I'm just now getting back into the swing of things, so I appreciate y'all's patience. Thank you to those of you who've already reached out, and for those of you who just want to know what you can do, I'm going to drop his Twitch and his YouTube links in the show notes / beneath in the comments. So go check those out when you get a chance. He was a really funny guy, great streamer, wonderful little brother, and he's going to be greatly missed. So, with that, coming up on Worlds Asunder.
Even the way I think about my characters interacting, sometimes I feel like, wait, are they making a contract? So the way my legal training shows up, I'm like, wait, that's a contract, right? Like when they're negotiating or they're bargaining, I'm like especially if you have Fae characters or certain, like even in John Wick, right? Like there's a book he signs, I'm like, that's a contract, right? So there's definitely that part of my brain that turns on.
As storytellers, we want to capture the hearts, minds, and imaginations of our readers, mainly through our expertly crafted worlds.
Creating new worlds in any genre might seem like a daunting task, but you don't have to reinvent the wheel for every story.
Welcome, weary writers, to Worlds Asunder, a world-building and writer's life podcast.
My co-host is David Shadoin, better known as Shady. It's not just a descriptor, it's also his moniker.
And she's H.Y. Gregor, or you can call her Haley, your friendly post-apocalyptic wasteland elf.
Together, we've got enough published to fill a small shelf, but why should you listen to us? Because we called in some favors.
Every other week, we bring you the best and brightest to give you the tips and tricks on world building and character building like the pros. So, open up your ear holes.
Get out your pen and paper.
And get ready for us to tear Worlds Asunder. This week, the wonderful Julia Vee joins us in Marco Polo, Part 1. Sit back and listen. Welcome back to Worlds Asunder, the only author podcast on the internet, bringing you all of the good author lore that you crave, and sometimes some Chinese that you don't. That's, how many days old is that now?
It wasn't true until the second half of that sentence. We do not need to talk about the quality of your leftovers in the show.
Okay. Somebody's trying to poison me slowly via dinner. Anyway. As always, I am your host, Shady David Shadoin. Our guest today is unfortunately having to sit through all of my shenanigans once again. But we'll get to all of those stories. My co-host, Haley H.Y. Gregor, joining us from the basement that I've chained her to while she writes her next book. And then, so our guest today was a trial lawyer in Silicon Valley. She attended UC Berkeley and majored in Asian studies. She often writes with her co-author, Ken Bebelle. Their novel, Ebony Gate, an Asian-inspired contemporary fantasy, was published by Tor and named a 2023 Golden Poppy Finalist for the Octavia E. Butler Award. The trilogy conclusion, Pearl City, released in July of 2025. She tries to write in such a way that you would think, yeah, I would eat that. It's Julia Vee.
I do have a focus on food, I admit it.
That's true. And we talked a little bit about that. Speaking of all the times you know, having to put up with all of my crap once again, we spent 3 days out in Salt Lake City, all crammed into a 10 by 10 booth together.
It was fun at Dragonsteel Nexus. I mean, I think I complained that sometimes I read a book and if they don't describe the food, I feel vaguely robbed after.
That's fair.
And I have the opposite. If there's too much food, I get hungry and then I just get angry. Like I experience a different kind of hanger because I'm reading a book and I'm like, dang it, now I really want. So.
Yeah. You're in good company. We had Gail Carragher on, who's notoriously a huge foodie. And that is one of the things I also do, is describe the food as much as possible. But
I feel like when you're writing speculative fiction, you know, this is one of those areas where you could either use the food to like connect people or anchor them even in a fantastical world, or you can make the food quite fantastical, you know, one or the other.
That's fair.
Which do you find yourself doing more?
I like to use food as an anchor and as a ritual for how families connect to each other.
Do you ever use real meals, like things that you actually make yourself, or have you looked stuff up and then gone, oh, I have to learn how to cook this? Do you cook?
Well, so we've done both, right? Like we've put in the foods that we are familiar with and love, and also we had an episode where in Blood Jade, our protagonist eats a magical eel, right? It's like a fantasy eel from Japan.
That's one way to do it. I made up like 3 different restaurants, 3 different places, and then used a real place in my last book that exists kind of along I-70 in Hays, Kansas. And then described a little bit of the food that they made. And I took their current menu and then tried to jump it forward 200 years and see what I could do. But
I always think about like what foods will survive in 200 years. Like what will we still be making, and what will like kids and teenagers and adults still like to eat? Like will we still have Kraft mac and cheese?
Yes.
Oh, for sure.
Right? It's like it's so universal and it's so beloved. I think, well, that should survive.
I think it's a cockroach of processed foods. Kraft mac and cheese is forever.
I should put it in our
Spam.
Earthquake box with the Spam. Right?
There you go.
Yeah, as long as you've got some. It's my favorite.
Yeah. Well, we'll come back to probably the food talk eventually, I'm sure. But I'm gonna start in kind of a different spot than sometimes I normally do. We had the Stovall's on technically a year ago, but we didn't publish their episodes until about 6 months ago. They are also previously lawyers. And so one of the things we had asked them is what got them changing careers. And I'm pretty sure we've talked about this, but for our audience, how did you make the jump? How did you go from being a trial lawyer to writer?
You know, I have the theory that the reason there are so many previous lawyers who are now authors is because when you're young, you know, and you like to read and you like to write, people in your life, teachers, adults, they'll say things to you like, you should go to law school, right? It's because they want you to have like food on the table and stuff like that, a 401k. And it was a good fit, right? I was writing for a different audience. I was writing for a judge and a jury. But it did teach me to adhere to deadlines, to deliver really polished work product. And I think those are transferable skill sets. But there is something very limiting in the practice of law that I think I've only talked to a few people about this, but at one point in my life, I was teaching at a law school, and it was so enjoyable for me because I had this magnified experience, right? It was like, here's my 3 hours, but I have a room of 20, 30 students, and I felt like I could work with more people. When you're practicing law, typically your time is exclusively owned by that one client because you're billing that one client and nobody else gets the benefit of your time. And I think for me, the appeal of like, okay, I want to transition my work to having an audience and being able to write for the enjoyment of many was always in the back of my mind. Like, oh, it would be really nice if someday I could share my writing with a much larger group of people.
I actually think it's funny that I have never thought about that jump like the correlation between storytelling and legal, but Shady and I are both almost lawyers. We both have backgrounds or education in legal as well. And so that's actually really interesting because I've never thought about that before. I feel like I did dodge law school, and I think that was probably the right call for me. But I worked in legal for about 4 years.
Yeah, I feel like it's a great career, like as far as careers go, and just like journalists, right? There's a high transferability of skill set when you're ready to write fiction. Although some would argue I was already writing fiction before. I think
especially your opposing counsel.
Yeah, right. But the thing about writing for entertainment that is like so liberating, right? That it's more engaging for me. Now, I do like one thing about when you're practicing law is that when you file your pleading, you're done, right? It's over, it's finished, you've turned it in. But sometimes I do feel like as a novel writer, you might spin your wheels more. Like I just recently rewrote the opening to my latest manuscript for the 7th time. I would never do that for like a legal brief. Like I usually would have nailed it by the 3rd try.
Turns out the facts of a case don't change mid-case.
Do you think your standard for yourself is higher now?
I think I was always a little type A, you know, that's probably what attracted me to law school in the first place. And then certainly after 3 years of law school and then 25 years in litigation, you do hone those skills. But I've been working harder, I think, to just enjoy the process of writing too. Meaning, writing is very unpredictable. Like you don't know how the book will land with readers after you send it out in the world, and so you really do have to write for your personal enjoyment because that's the part that you can control, right?
Do you find any other of your legal habits, I'm suddenly fascinated by this, bleed into your writing, like the way that you outline or the way that you think through things at all?
Well, I do dictate, and I think that came from my legal training.
Okay.
So you know how they often say like, oh, sometimes you have to tell yourself the story first, and that's kind of what I use my dictation draft for, which is like to tell my story, tell me my own story first, right? Like work it out in the 0 draft through dictation. And I mean, I'm a Gen Xer, so like when I started practicing law, I had a secretary, and I like really had a polished dictation skill set, like and they were recorded on little micro cassettes, and a secretary would like type them out. So I came from dictation in a very old school way. And I think that, even the way I think about my characters interacting, sometimes I feel like, wait, are they making a contract? So the way my legal training shows up, I'm like, wait, that's a contract, right? Like when they're negotiating or they're bargaining, I'm like, especially if you have fae characters or certain, like even in John Wick, right? Like there's a book he signs. I'm like, that's a contract, right? So there's definitely that part of my brain that turns on,
We've been legally bound by the fae. But so your urban fantasy though, a little bit different from what we might expect from the fae or those kinds of contracts, right? Because you guys have a very specific, and I don't want to say, it is very unique, but it's not like it's the only Asian inspired mythology out there, but it's not as commonly seen, though we're getting a lot more of it, which I think is super exciting.
Yeah, I think for us, Ken and I were hugely influenced by John Wick. We just loved this whole secret world of assassins and the Continental, right? Like the fact that all these things are happening inside this hotel. And the other thing we were fascinated by was the money. Those gold coins? You have no idea what they're worth, right? It could buy you a scotch, or it could buy you someone taking away a dead body. Like it had like this huge range in like how much you could purchase with this gold coin, right?
So would you recommend the Continental? Because I haven't seen that.
The show? I haven't watched the show. Okay. I watched all of the major ones in the franchise, right?
Okay.
I think I missed John Wick 4, and I've seen the first 2 episodes of The Continental.
Did you like The Continental?
I did. I need to go back and watch. Like it's on my list to go back and watch because I really enjoyed it. But
Yeah, I'm adding
the
it
first
to the list
episode
now.
was
I literally have a
50
list.
minutes.
I did. So Ken and I did the John Wick experience in New York City. It was at the Continental. So they do this whole reenactment. You kind of like solve a mystery. It was very entertaining. And then I heard they're bringing it to Vegas. Maybe it's already there. I don't know.
That'd be cool.
That sounds awesome. Yeah. So is it kind of like an escape room, sort of? Like the way that you have to go in and solve the puzzles?
You get little clues, and you have to go to like parts of the building, and the actors in there will do the scene for you, so you hear the clue. Right?
Okay.
That sounds
That's
awesome.
cool.
Yeah.
That reminds me, I'm going to give a shout out a little bit to some people we saw last year, but we've seen some of them since, the Doghouse Murder Mysteries group. It does like dinner theater and a show, murder mystery type stuff. Those guys we did, when we went to Nerdy Growl last year, they did kind of a murder mystery while everybody's having dinner, and they kept having different scenes where you get different clues and stuff. And they're pretty cool. They were a lot of fun to hang out with. But
I am much better at watching those than I am at participating in those. I am not an interactive theater kind of gal. I freeze.
Well, and
I mean, I like escape rooms, but like I imagine it's similar.
They gave me a roll in it. Like we walked in and they grabbed me and gave me a roll, and I panicked. It was a lot of fun. They were great. NPC. Right? Like I am not an actress. And even like your dictation, I find fascinating because I am limited to like my fingertips tell stories. And my tongue very much does not. So people who can dictate fascinate me because my brain translates it as like a totally different skill set. So I think it's something I wish I could do it, but I have not had luck so far.
Ken and I, we've co-written over 1 million words together and over 10 novels together and this kind of thing. And we're so different. He plays like a little movie in his head. So when he's typing, he's just sort of transcribing what he sees. And so he said like he usually doesn't feel ready to write a scene until he can kind of play it all out like a little film clip for him. Whereas for me, like until I see something on the screen, I can't really flesh it out. So I think for me, talking it out through dictation is a form of exploratory writing, right? Even though I don't think of myself exactly as a pantser, I might have an outline that says, they get from point A to point B and they find this clue. Right. It's a very 2-sentence kind of thing in my outline, my scene outline. But then talking it out is how I imagine the characters engaging in that scene. I
dictated part of my first, or a good chunk of my first book that way. Speaking of John Wick, I think you and I talked about this at Dragonsteel too, that you had talked about you guys used John Wick in your comparison. And we had used John Wick as one of our comparisons for Companion to Ghosts. But that was the thing, was that like I would imagine, because I'm kind of like Ken, where I would visualize the scene and then speak it out while I was like driving to work, and then just clean it up a little bit afterwards. Like that sounded much better in my head, but now that I'm reading it, it's probably not as good. I need to change this.
Yeah, but I mean, all the magic comes in revision, right? And so I feel like even if it's terrible, like even if it's just my 0 draft, it's okay, like to sort of meander a little bit in that first version.
Yeah, that's fair.
It also feels just like lower stakes.
Haley, you had something, and I think I interrupted you.
I have several. I love the concept of a 0 draft, actually, and that's not something that we have talked about on this show before. So as Shady had been talking about offline a little bit before we started recording, was the scope of the show. And one of the things is that it's kind of like, it's the behind the scenes, like how things happen behind the book or, before the first page kind of a deal. Would you talk to us a little bit about people who are maybe listening to the show and trying to start to get their own routine for their writing habits? Will you talk about your 0 draft process and how you differentiate that from a first draft?
Yeah, so I know Shady and I talked about like what we do before we are willing to send a draft to the editor, right? So like our editor isn't getting our first draft. They're getting something maybe we've done a few passes through to try and clean it up, and we hope we have addressed anything major in that version. But I think of the zero draft as not even something I would let somebody else read. Right? It's really just for me to read. And I think it's because when I'm doing my outline is not necessarily that robust, right? My outline is much more like plotty McPlotty pants, right? They need to do these things and find these clues and, you know, get from this location to another location. So those are all mechanics. And then when I actually have to talk it out, I kind of have to think, well, what other engagement are these two characters going to have, or how many characters entirely are in this scene, and what is the emotional turning point of this scene, right? Does it start out like they're clueless and at the end they have a revelation, and so like hallelujah, right? Or is it the opposite? They come in hot and then there's a major setback. So I use that zero draft as an opportunity to spec out like how it could look, right? And so it could, my scenes average between, I would say, 1,500 to 2,500 words. And so my zero draft might only be like 1,000 words because it's not the real scene. It's just me blocking it out like an actor on stage, just kind of walking through all those things. And then when I read it, like, okay, so now I've gotten it out of my phone and onto like a text file. Then I have those inspirations where I'm like, oh, this is where interiority of the character makes sense, right? This is where maybe they're going to have a flashback, or maybe they're going to have an argument. This is where all their conflict is. And so it becomes more obvious to me once I get that wave file into a text format, right? And I think other people type to get their zero draft, you know, and that's great. But I try not to stay in front of the computer all day because it happens too much. And so this is like an excuse for me to walk the dog or just go outside. And that's how I treat the zero draft and why I use dictation.
So your dictation process, I imagine, is a little different than it used to be from the microtape, which I used to have to be that I was the paralegal that was listening to those and typing them. What software, briefly, like you don't have to give us the full rundown, but are you using what kind of are you using AI, sorry, or what kind of recording software are you using, and are you using a transcription?
So, yeah, initially I used Dragon, Naturally Speaking, which I had, as an attorney, I had tested out for like over a decade, right? So it had gotten pretty good actually. So on one of my machines, I have a Windows machine that has Dragon Naturally Speaking on there. It's pretty accurate. But at my MacBook, doesn't have that on there. And so I've tried using just dictate into the Google Doc sometimes and dictate into the Microsoft Word, because you can just turn the mic on. It's free. And because it's just my first draft, it doesn't have to be that good anyway. Like the quality doesn't have to be great. Lately I've been using Otter AI, but the AI is not the part that like does anything for me, but it is entertaining. So for me, it's just like transcription, but it's meeting software. And so the reason it's funny is it gives you this summary that makes it sound like your characters have all these action items, like these to-do lists and stuff. So it almost makes me feel productive, like my characters are real people and we just had a meeting.
I love, I've used just the free Otter AI. I usually, if I'm dictating, it's for brainstorming.
Yes.
But because I also write fantasy, I imagine you've run into this, where like its interpretations of how to spell some of the words that you're using often not great. So you have to, there was a word that was in my first novel. The word was Naragi, which was a universe because it was a shared universe word. But it's often Otter thought that I was saying Iraqi. So anytime I was reading my otter notes, if it said Iraqi, I knew that it was meant to be Naragi, and I would have to like go in and find it and replace it everywhere. So it's not as
Yeah,
smart
I
as we would like for it to be.
I pick a fake word, so it'd be like
Oh,
pierogi, and it would just be like this fake
yeah.
word that isn't going to be embedded in another word. And same with names. Like I will pick a name that's not a fantasy name, so it'll be some name like Kevin, you know. And then it just, I know it's just one of those little tactics for using dictation software.
Find and replace all.
Yes.
That's something that wouldn't even have occurred to me. No, because I had to do some archaeology of sorts to try to undo a little bit, which maybe is part of why I never got good at it. But
So we touched on it a little bit. You talked about cooking up a mythical Asian mythos beast. But what else? What else do you pull? Really, let's kind of rewind that a bit. Where do you start? Like, where did you and Ken start when you went after kind of some of the pulling from, not just East Asian culture, but like the mythology of some of the things that you've added into your urban fantasy?
Well, the most obvious thing was we wanted dragons, but we wanted East Asian dragons. And I had this like very grandiose idea at one point, like maybe I could become an expert on like Chinese dragons. Okay, that was completely absurd because China is a vast nation and it also has like hundreds of thousands of years of history. And so depending where you are, what region you're in, dragons are different, right? So like black dragons of the north are different and like dragons along the river are different. And so it became this very interesting exercise in researching like, okay, if we were going to build like a religion around dragon worship, how would it look and what could we kind of riff off of in the story that each of these gods would have sort of a different personality. And then it became pretty obvious because there was this artistic element. Like in China, a lot of the architecture has elements from the 9 sons of the dragon. So you can see it represented physically, right? So on the bell, there's a little dragon that's like the guardian that scares away whales, right? So Pulau is a little dragon, one of the sons that's on the bell. On the sword hilts, there's another one, and it's like a wolf dragon hybrid, and so he's the bellicose dragon, the warlike dragon. And so once we kind of narrowed in on like, well, what is the most popular, like what is the most visually depicted, it became simpler to just build off that element into this world where we said, okay, what if they were descended from these dragons? Like, what if they thought they had a magical heritage? Then like, how much would we use of this lore? But yeah, research is always a lot of fun, but also can take you down a lot of rabbit holes.
So how do you keep yourself from getting lost in the rabbit holes?
Sometimes I feel like you have to just give yourself a limit. Like you're like, okay, 3 research questions, and then you have to stop. You have to go, right, Julia. But other times I am actually looking for inspiration. And so I have this routine now where I give myself an hour every day, like where I'm just going to read something adjacent to what I'm working on. I don't know exactly what I'm looking for, but I'm kind of filling the creative well. And so presently I'm reading The Travels of Marco Polo, right?
Oh.
And it's so funny when you read a historical text, it does read like pure fantasy, actually. And what's amazing about Marco Polo is like during that time when he came back and told these stories, everyone thought he was making it up, right? And so now when you're reading The Travels of Marco Polo, there are 8 million annotations from scholars who have basically tried to prove or disprove, where he was and what he saw. And it's fascinating. It's almost like excavating. Like when you talked about archaeology for your dictation, this is what it's like, unearthing this legend, right? These are his memoirs or his travel logs. And so you have all these footnotes where people are like, we think this well that he's talking about was actually in this country, and they did this thing did exist, right?
Well, and it gets even more interesting with Polo because he has so many translations from his originals. Only because I have also been reading it for research.
What? Okay.
Did I know this?
How did we not talk about this in December? Anyway.
Because it's one of the projects that got sidelined when I was working on different projects. It will come back. It is going to come back with a vengeance, but not right this minute.
It's actually a spin-off of my urban fantasy series is in John Osborne's Milesian Accords world, and we're doing a short story spin-off that will incorporate some of the stuff from Marco Polo. So
yeah,
it's funny that you say short story because like I find that even if it's a short story, I will do like an insane amount of research for it. Like Ken and I wrote a short story that's going in a Valkyrie anthology, and they told us, the editor was like, you have 4,000 words max, so it cannot be very long. I'm sure Ken and I both did over 10 or 15 hours of research just because we had this like plot premise and we wanted to like make it feel like she was really a long-lived Valkyrie, right? And so one of the things we ended up researching was like Viking chess, you know, and like how do you play Viking chess, right?
Yeah, it's but that was the thing was like so I have previously announced writing in the urban fantasy series that or the urban fantasy universe that we're talking about. I have kind of a Japanese mythos inspired trilogy that will eventually get written and will eventually find a place. We just don't have a place for it to land yet, so it's not coming out yet. But like doing all the research for that, doing all the research on Polo, it's interesting to see like how things translate down. And so it's like, okay, there's an original document somewhere that has all of the exact answers. However, because of translation errors in certain, you know, from certain points in history, like you're going to end up with a document that has a lot of mistakes in it. And so like you're talking about some of the scholars who are like, well, we think it was this. I like sometimes question their judgment on thinking about that because it's like, how many translations deep are you? Like, how many generations removed are you? You're muted, Julia.
I guess the original text was ostensibly in Italian, right?
Yes.
So certainly there's that first translation, unless they are reading the original Italian, which some of these scholars are in the UK that are annotating the travels of Marco Polo. Their biases are quite funny to me too, and I also have to remind myself, like Marco Polo himself was a storyteller, so of course it's like embellished, right? This tale too, right? Because his premise was like, oh well, the Khan asked me to like bring him these Christians because clearly they were more trustworthy than anyone else, you know.
I also have always liked the premise of making copies of copies back when a lot of things were just handwritten, and how one little error over however many years and however many copies, you know, could blow up. I have wondered, I don't know, there's jokes about that, but you wonder what you've missed.
You know, I think like when I look at the success of something like the Da Vinci Code, part of why Dan Brown is so able to captivate all of us as readers is he opens with, hey, these are all real. And most of us have some passing familiarity with Leonardo da Vinci, right? So we recognize the name, and there are a number of great works that survive. And so this journal of Marco Polo's is like, the fact was, yeah, it was written 600 years ago, but there are these translations floating around. And I came to it in a kind of a weird way. I was obsessed with like Mongolian history and the secret history of the Mongolians. And so like that text was lost in the original Mongolian. But because Kublai Khan was the emperor of China, like during the Yuan dynasty, it had been translated into Chinese. And so the way Mongolians are able to read it today is because they translated it back from Chinese back to Mongolian in order to recover the text.
Yeah. And so what are you losing in those jumps, right?
Who knows, right? It's kind of incredible, but yes, you do have to kind of, I think, more broadly assume not everything is literally correct.
Well, and then the other thing that I'm curious how you approached in urban fantasy with mythology specifically, is how and where you decided to diverge from the research that you were doing and then make it your own. Because I ran into the opposite. Mine was all Russian and it was oral storytelling traditions, and there's not a lot. So I could just run with it because there wasn't near as much. Mm-hmm. But I imagine you were saying you had so much. And at some point you had to say, okay, but this is what I'm going to make it. So I'm curious about that balance.
Well, it's funny because I had ambitiously undertaken this dragon research in China, and what I came across was something wild, which was this revisionist dragon history, where the government had stepped in and said, we're going to now tell you this dragon history, and it's going to become the de facto accepted dragon history from now on. So
that makes me so happy.
Once I came across that, I think it was kind of like, okay, like I can do whatever I want. Within reason, because clearly there is no unified theory of dragons, right? Even though the government put it on a plaque. So I think at that point, where we used it as a launch pad was more, okay, if you have these deities, right? Like if you have these 9 sons of the dragon, like how would they behave with one another? And then if you extrapolated, like how would a culture treat this if it were their religion, then it was all artistic exercise after that. So we didn't, once we had locked into like using that pantheon, we were, I think, more comfortable with this is a fantasy book and we're not historians and we're not writing historical fiction or even alternate history.
Have you ever had a reader or a review be like, oh, they did this wrong with the dragons or anything like that?
Oh my gosh. This is such a diaspora problem, but like here in the US, like, you are this giant melting pot, or at least you can be in many places. And I have had some purists say, oh, well, that would never happen, right? Like, because this is a Japanese thing and that's a Chinese thing. And I'm like, okay, but they're magical. Like, they are not actually bound by political, geography. There's like an alternate realm even that they come from. So like, I found it humorous how seriously people take things. But one reviewer early on, I also read all my reviews, which I maybe don't recommend to everyone, but it was very moving. This one reviewer said that they really enjoyed the aspect of, cultures bleeding into one another, right? Which I think does happen. Like here, I live in California, and just even the way we eat, right, is like very multicultural. And so I think about, our cuisines being shared, and it doesn't really matter that it came from another country, but we still eat it here, right? Like, and I think some readers get it. And so it does resonate for some of them. And honestly, as a writer, you can't be for everyone. Your work has to be for a specific audience.
Well, there you have it. You made it to the end of yet another episode of Worlds Asunder. Hopefully you learned a lot from Julia, especially about how she uses her research to inspire her writing, a little bit about co-authoring, a little bit about food, some techniques in dictation. Man, she covered a wide range of topics this time around, and that's not going to stop by the time we get to the next one. But hope you were entertained. Sorry about some of the technical difficulties there. Hopefully we don't have near as much fun with those on the next episode. If you liked who you're seeing and what we're saying, make sure you go follow us at any of our links in the show notes. Next, or in 2 weeks, we will have Julia back on for Marco Polo Part 2. Should be a good time. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And as always, thanks for helping us tear the worlds asunder. We'll see you next time.